Okay, we're going to get started momentarily. Just wait for people to get back to their seats. Testing 1 2. Testing 1 2. Testing 1 2. Just getting for those of you who are here, we're also broadcasting live through First Nation Help Desk. So, well, thank you everyone for following our timelines and making a short lunch. I appreciate that. It's not often that I get a microphone and need a biography to introduce my mother, but I'm going to call up next Dr. Marie Baptiste, who many of us are familiar with here. She has written and lectured extensively on cognitive imperialism, Indigenous knowledge, and the humanities, and the decolonization of Aboriginal education, as well as worked actively in First Nation schools as administrator, teacher, consultant, and curriculum developer, advancing Indigenous knowledge, epistemologies, language, pedagogy, and research. She currently works for the University of Saskatchewan within the Education Department. She is a recipient of a National Aboriginal Achievement Award, and she is one of the lead in the project of the Mi'kmaq Humanities Project, which she's going to be discussing with us today. So without further ado, Dr. Marie Baptiste.
Well, Jaime, well, Dasi Betki Mijik, that all my relatives are here and all my relatives have come to visit. It is a wonderful pleasure to be in my own country, my own homeland, Mi'kma'ki, largely, Unama'ki specifically, and on the Member 2 Reserve where we're located. And I'd like to acknowledge those who are being streamed in from other communities, probably Wamakoku, Waikagma communities, maybe even my own home, Bodladek. So with that in mind, I have put together with Jaime's kind of urgings, a PowerPoint, which I at the first said I would like not to do because it's so confining, but I have put together just a few things on here to talk about the project and to lead into some of the Mi'kmaq project that we're talking about today.
That's the cover of your book.
That it is. And that was at the WIPSI conference in 2005 in Calgary. One of my dearest friends from years ago when I first went to university was a woman by the name of Linda Smith. And Linda Smith is a Maori from New Zealand. And it was in those early years that she talked about decolonization. And decolonization is something that I always talk about and also take out in terms of my work because it really has resonance and meaning to me. And in her talk, she talks about decolonization is about centering ourselves, centering our concerns and worldviews, and then coming to know and understand theory and research from our own perspectives and for our own purposes. And it isn't with that in mind that we look at treaty education, is that we need to be focused as Indigenous scholars out in the field to be focusing on the kinds of things that's going to be able to lead to a decolonized mindset and a decolonized education. And the thing is that, as Brenda eloquently pointed out, is that decolonization also is not just for Mi'kmaq people or for indigenous people, but really decolonization is something that all peoples need, and it is something that comes about because of the history and because of the context of colonization that has occurred in all of our communities across Canada, United States, all the Americas, into the Commonwealth countries, into Australia, New Zealand, and other places around the world. So when we look at the kind of work that I've done over in the past, part of it is to look at the ways in which Indigenous research comes about. Oops, sorry. Don't move it? Okay. Well, then I will either not use it, because I can't see that far. So anyway, the thing is that I'm building upon the work that Albert Marshall, Merdina Marshall have advocated in this community and these places, is seeing through two eyes. In other words, seeing fully through the eyes of a Mi'kmaq person, as well as to understand that our colonial and educational history gives us another eye. And it is through these two eyes that we as educators continue to teach as well as to learn. And so we need to be able to recognize and acknowledge that. And so we frame all of our work, or my work is framed within an Indigenous knowledge perspective. Although at one time ago, in the early 80s and before that, people didn't use Indigenous knowledge. Indigenous knowledge was not a term that was used up until probably the early 90s in the work was going on at the time in the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And that kind of work built a notion of Indigenous knowledge and knowledges. And it wasn't until 1998 that the federal government enlisted Cygage and myself and our team of researchers to actually define an Indigenous knowledge. And we did so, and as a result of the work that we did, we put forth the book Protecting Indigenous Knowledge, A Global Challenge, which was looking at what is Indigenous knowledge and how is it not protected by virtue of the Western frameworks of copyright, trademarks, and patents. So the other thing about the work that we do is working on privileging place, privileging the ontologies, and we use the big word called ontologies, which really is about the way we think, the way we do things, the way we believe, how we live in the world is what that means. And so our research then is building on the notion that what we are, the way we think, the way we believe, is both a theory, which tells us, explains the world to us. That's what theory is, it explains the world. But in the same way it explains the world, it also tells us how to live. And so theory and methodology in an Indigenous framework is one and the same. We teach, and we teach by it, and we live by it. So those are the things that are different from non-Indigenous perspectives, that they can position theory as though a way of explaining things, and there's so many ways to explain it, but that doesn't tell you how to be or how to live in the world. And ours is one. One of the things that has come about in my understandings is that throughout our existence, we have had to live with a Eurocentric framework. And that Eurocentric framework imported through discourses, through people, through scholarship, through the work that politicians and other people brought into this country. We've all been marinated in Eurocentrism. And that is our elders, our teachers, every one of us. None of us escapes that particular framework. And because we are marinated in Eurocentrism, sometimes it's hard for us to position it to see where we are inside of it and where we are outside of it, because it sort of marinates us, and sometimes we connect our own thinking like, oh yeah, well, we got to go, gamble because gambling is part of our culture. part of who we are. And so it's hard to sort of separate what things are and what is actually belonging to this other system and what is belonging to us, and how do we look at ourselves. So one of the things that I did in terms of coming to the project Animating the Mi'kmaq Humanities was to first be recognizing that there is a reason, there's a problem. And the big problem was one that I always knew, one that our people always knew, and that was that when you have colonialism, when you have people coming in and they bring with them a different humanity and impose it on us, that basically that we are left thinking that we are less than if that's all we get. So the Western humanities is a very contested site. And so today, at one time, Western civilization, Western art, that's how I went to school. That was the foundation of my education. But it was one that I always had to think about in terms of people who came from afar. And so today we are looking at and thinking about the ways in which these Eurocentric humanities have been pervasive within the universities, within schools, within colleges, within our own education, and how they create core ideas of individuality, Eurocentric values of morality, patriarchy, meaning the father is all dominant and privileged. There's dominance, privilege, architecture, conflict, wars, colonial violence, all that mark what Western civilization has brought to us. So that kind of framework, brings with it the whole modernist project as well as the colonial project, which positions superiority as the foundation of the imperial project. So whenever we looked at anything that needed to be done, the government said, we will give it to you. You will tell you how to do it. We'll tell you how to run a government. You don't know how to run a government. We'll tell you how to run a school. We'll teach you how to, grow your garden. We'll teach you everything you need to know, hunt, fish, whatever. It always came from afar. And that was because that was part of that superior thinking, that imperial project that went with it. And so as we've come to understand universities today, kind of the building the hierarchy, if you would say PhD is and BS is, what we often think of a BS as a, bullshit, and then PhD is piled higher and deeper. Basically what it means is we're piled higher and deeper in Eurocentric education, and that's deeply embedded within the system. So my team looked at that in terms of what has been happening in education. And as we looked at education as far back as the residential schools and even before that, the day schools, and I did my dissertation looking at the Mi'kmaq writing systems and also looking at education and the ways in which we had lost who we were by virtue of this Eurocentric superior notion that came in with residential schools, day schools, and all the other schools, even provincial schools. And how since 1974, we've been in a process of what I call the Mi'kmaq Renaissance. And that renaissance has been in terms of restoring and renewing and recovering who we are as people, our language, our cultures, our ways of being, our knowing, and our indigenous knowledges, and all of those things. So that kind of notion of the way in which the schools have been sources of Eurocentric humanities has left our students outside the door and with their baggage. And their baggage is language, their baggage is their relations, their baggage is their land, their baggage is notions of sustainability, their baggage is their communal activities that they have in their communities, their baggage is their spirituality, and much, much more. So part of what we did then, did I go back, was to, was to put together a research project that we started in 2010, which was to to look at Mi'kmaq humanities, to center Mi'kmaq humanities in the manner in which Linda Smith talked about decolonization, to bring research to us and to really think about what is Mi'kmaq as theory and what is Mi'kmaq as methodology. And so part of understanding what Mi'kmaq as theory is to really go back to the stories and the teachings and the language and so on. And so our project went to do a literature view of what was available, which was very little, but what it was taken from other people's points of view. We did dialogues with Mi'kmaq people in several communities. We cataloged how Mi'kmaq understand concepts and ideas and looked at the ideas that had been started to be coming forward. Nediglum is one of those ideas that is both theory and also practice. It tells us what it is that how do we live together, how do we live in prosperity, and how we share it. So it then also teaches how to be. So we're both working with theory, explaining our life, but also talking about a theory of being. And then we looked for the study of languages and words, and then we cataloged Mi'kmaq perspectives. In other words, we tried to find all the ways in which people talked about themselves. Now, part of that, as I mentioned, was this Indigenous Renaissance note during the constitutional era, who our new Native warriors were and what they looked like over there. And the work at the United Nations has been very important to us. And what has been the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples have given to us are several provisions. Section 31(1) in the Declaration says Indigenous people have the right to maintain, control, protect, develop their cultural heritage, traditional knowledge, and traditional cultural expressions, and oral traditions, literatures, design, sports, traditional games, visual and performance arts as well. All these. So in the same one is that Indigenous peoples have the right to revitalize, use, develop, and transmit to future generations their language, philosophies, histories, oral traditions, and their writing systems. So this part of what we look at is in part what we call the humanities. Humanities is a word that comes again from the European Eurocentric disciplinary systems, which usually included religion, history, philosophy, literature, language, art, culture, art histories, and so on, and history. And so those really framed what the humanities are. So when you look at those things called humanities, we see them now as in bits and discrete things, right? You know, art is over here, religion is over there, you know, and history is over there. Whereas we see humanities and Mi'kmaq people as part of a unified collective whole. And we begin to think about this collective whole, what this thing means, and then we see it in a circle as opposed to the linear form that is given in the humanities work. So I just wanted to say that there's a couple of things that I always teach when I do my work. And one is that all of us have to go through a process of what I call deconstructing. We have to deconstruct the European, Eurocentric superiority thinking. Where did they get that thinking? How did they get that thinking? And what is it that we are going to refuse about that thinking? So part of it is to develop the awareness and the critique of Eurocentric colonial bias and racialized negative discourses over time. We also need to examine our Constitution, the laws, the policies, the history, and the differential treatment and resources to Aboriginal peoples to see how colonialism and discrimination, bias, prejudice, discrimination, and racism are embedded within those systems and how they continue to become the ways that they treat people today. In 1996, when the Royal Commission report on Aboriginal peoples came out, the report said that while there is no that people in the governments and so on that no longer accept that discrimination and racism is an acceptable norm, it still is inherently embedded within the old system, as well as it comes out in new forms every day. And so we need to also, importantly, address the intergenerational trauma that came about because of the colonial history we lived. The people who have gone to residential schools, the people who have lived with cognitive assimilation, the loss of language, the loss of indigenous knowledge, the past and present negativities, and all the negative discourses that the media and the books have constantly put out on us, as well as the lateral violence. That is, that what we begin to normalize is violence that has been on us, we normalize violence to each other. So there's a lateral violence that we need to be constantly looking at and thinking about how we enact it because of the kind of history that we've led and the internal racism that we continue to have, and how that has affected us as Indigenous people, how it affects our self-confidence, our worldviews, and what it does to youth today in the schools. Because that kind of thing still exists and still affects the way they accept themselves in the schools as well as they treat each other. So we're still always dealing with that. And the important part, the second important part that I think is that needs to be thought through is that we need to be thinking about the ways in which we reconstruct. So on one end is the deconstructing, taking apart, rethinking, and then the other part is the reconstructing. So the reconstruction is to help students to see the value and benefits of Indigenous knowledges in their lives and education, humanities, and visual arts, and everywhere where the contributions of our people are, and that comes in our schooling, right? So when our schools are embedding this in their curriculum, embedding it in the universities, embedding it in the media and so on, we're looking at the ways in which we're able to help not just students but people themselves. So we need to aim for a theory and a practice that also helps to heal present and past traumas. A lot of the work, one of my friends, Rupert Ross, wrote a book called Indigenous Healing, Exploring Traditional Paths. Best wonderful thing that everyone should read, because he's really talking about it's not just individuals that need healing, which they do. My own sister is one who went to residential school, who has need for individual healing. But it also is about how we need to do a collective healing. And the collective healing is when we hear our stories, when we hear our testimonies, then everyone begins to say, yeah, I experienced the same thing, or I experienced the same in a different way. And so we get to see that our experience is not just personal and individual, but it is also collective. And that collective also needs to be healed as well. And we can begin to see that yes, there are some people who have lived violent lives and they have violent situations in their families, but when you look at the way in how the collective has been treated, you begin to realize how that kind of trauma and violence has been put on the people as a whole, and we just enact it in certain kinds of ways. So I'm going to skip a little bit through this just to say I honor one of my dear elder friends, Caroline Gould, who we went to see at the beginning of our work on this project a year before she passed away. And we asked her, what is it that we should teach in the humanities? And she said to us, teach the baskets. And so for us, we also have taking seriously the notion of the baskets, because the baskets is really, and in my view, is that everything we teach in Mi'kmaq, in Mungo people, is a part of the whole. So we can take one thing and it reflects everything. And so it is when we look at the baskets, we look at the ancestral knowledge and holistic lifelong learning. We look at the deep historical contemporary roots with the land. We look at the learning of Mi'kmaq language, that part of making baskets was listening to the stories of the people as well as how you made certain things. It's about the spiritual base of gratitude to the forest, to the earth, and to the water. It's about a family and communal activity. It's about integrating indigenous knowledge and stories and the history of the people, the economic and cultural value, creative artistry, and more. It was David Bohm who said, "The part unfolds the whole." And when I look at any part of indigenous people, when you look at it as the whole, when you look at anything, any one thing that belongs to us, we begin to see, as we move away the layers of the onion that is in that one thing, that eventually that one thing will unfold the whole of who we are. So it doesn't matter where you start, is what I'm saying. It doesn't matter where you start. You start from any one place and you're all going to get there. So one of the things that we did as part of this project with Barry and Barry Bernard was to do a project on the Unama'ki Mi'kmaq basket makers. And through the funds that I had in SSHRC, we created this video about which I will pass this around and even give away to somebody who comes the farthest from us. Anyway, this is a way in which we have captured the Mi'kmaq basket stories in Mi'kmaq and with subheads in English. So, although there's some of it that's also English. Another part of that project that we did was that we built the Mi'kmaq archives. So the Mi'kmaq archives was where there were many teachers who said, there's nothing available by Mi'kmaq people. You know, we have a hard time finding it, we don't know where it is, and and all that sort of stuff. So what we did is we created this Mi'kmaq archives, which is online. Go to mi'kmaqarchives.ca, and in there are over 50 authors that are Mi'kmaq. And those Mi'kmaq authors have a full listing of all their bibliography up to 2015, actually. And, 2014. And in there, all of the bibliography information, abstracts, bios on the authors, and so on, are a way in which all scholars, indigenous scholars, can look to and find stuff that's written by Mi'kmaq, which needs to be continued. And that is to say that when the project ended, we were not able to populate it with anymore because we had no more monies to do so. So if there's monies to be gotten, we need to repopulate every year with new information that goes up on here as well as to add more to it. So part of that deals with all these different kinds of topical areas, and then we had a launch in our Mi'kmaq community last year. And then the other thing is that we started thinking about this Mi'kmaq Education Treaty project. And one of the things we decided that was important is that there was a lot of material out into the field. I would say Bill Witkin, Wallace and Wallace, and many, many anthropologists and historians that have put out some very good material, but it's written from another perspective. And when it's written from that perspective, they miss something. They miss the way that the part unfolds the whole. And so for us, we had a meeting and we had many sponsors, some of whom are here and some of the authors that are here, to take us to a place where we would begin to build what was called at the time a treaty handbook. And we had envisioned that this handbook would be put together, we'd put it online, we'd make it available to everybody, much like we have done with the video, and that we would begin to foster treaty education across the province and beyond. We have got to the place where we have taken and received the drafts of some of the authors now, and we have gotten some editorial assistance from Russell Barsh, and we also have gotten some of them finalized. But I guess we've also had a book proposal that was accepted by CBU Press, although I think that CBU Press might be ending in the coming year, so we need to rethink whether that's the place to put it. But the importance of that project is really to fill the gap, and it's to fill the gap on the literature from Mi'kmaq perspectives as people who have been working on the treaties themselves. In this case, it is our Mi'kmaq junior lawyers, our researchers, our Mi'kmaq strategists and advocates for Mi'kmaq Aboriginal and treaty rights. It's also that we are trying to build a more of a recognition of the oral history, and that oral history and oral traditions have had a large share in archival material, but we haven't heard it from the people themselves. In other words, we need to get more oral archival information available, or oral information that's put into text or print or in video or oral form and so on. And that at present, the schools are valuing writing over the oral tradition. And so in some ways, our youth think that writing is where, the truth is found. And so what we need to do as Mi'kmaq people to think about how we're going to bring the oral tradition into the written form, as well as to honor the oral tradition now in multiple ways, such as the videos, such as online blogs or whatever that they put forward. There are many other ways to capture the oral tradition than was before. We did solicit authors, and in your binders, I put together the information about those authors that were solicited or who agreed. Jaime Sagage, Russell Barsh, Stu Killen, Doug Brown, Stephen Augustine, Patrick Augustine, Carrie Prosper, Naomi Metallic all have pieces that are in that right now with the editing assistants. But we need a better balance of women in that book. We need a better balance of elders and their information. We need more of a balance of Mi'kmaq across districts, so it isn't all in one place. And we need this timeline of events, such as you have in yours, and part Sagage said he would work on pieces of it, but we still need to be building this timeline. But we also need more than that. We need the collaboration, the dialogue, the continued work from within Mi'kmaq communities, because each day, we lose elders, we lose people. And we have found that, and I said, when I was working on this project, I said, Sagage, you have been working with Alec Denny for so many years. You need to say something about your work with him. And so the first part of that project, or part of his work, and you'll see in the workbook, if you just go to that page, I won't go through the introduction, but I would like to just give you a little overview of what those chapters are currently about. Sagage's work is really about his meeting up with Alec Denny, and Alec providing him with a new mandate in researching treaties, and also for working on Aboriginal and treaty rights. And so from his well-written and very personal experience, he tells the stories of Alec, as well as the funny, as well as the strategic way in which he took us through various things. So that the whole treaty relationship and Alec's vision comes through. And I think that part of what, we didn't intend was to make this a book about Alec Denny, but it ended up being a book about Alec Denny in part because everybody is touched by Alec Denny, who today still stands and remembers all of every speech he gave at whatever, or who sat at his table. And so the other one was Stu Killen, and he was a former superintendent of Indian Affairs, trained and told that you got to go out, and our job is to assimilate all those Indians, and your job is to be the boss. And one of the things that he learned along the way is when he went out to Manitoba is that he refused to be the boss, and he refused to set the agenda for people. And after that, Manitoba people started taking control of their own agenda, taking care of their own ideas and so on, and he sat back and sort of supported and helped them. And then he came back, took popular education at St. FX, and then it was at the time when they were going through the white paper policy. They said, why don't you write a proposal? So he wrote this proposal, and instead of giving the money to St. FX, he gave it to UNSI, or the Union Nova Scotia Indians, and he was then persona non grata at St. FX after that. So anyway, he tells these little stories of the vignettes of that. Carrie's lovely essay is about his life, played a cat and mouse game, hiding his fishing, hiding his hunting, hiding and listening and watching and thinking and living, being Mi'kmaq, but also recognizing that everyone, white people saw him, Mi'kmaq people, as not having any rights. And therefore, he then moves to the point of saying, our kids today now have these rights, and they don't understand what the cat and mouse game was all about, and they got to remember why they have a treaty and how to protect it and what their responsibility is. So it's really an important one. Doug Brown's essay is about the treaty run to hunt food. And he thought it was an easy case to take up, and he was just going to, run through and tell about the treaty. And in the end, as he got to this, he realized that it was a far more complex kind of thing. And the whole white rule around sport hunting was interfering with the whole notion of food hunting and living by the food and so on. And so it's really a wonderful essay. And he also, too, mentions Alec Denny. Russell Barsh, I asked him, I said, Russell, you really need to tell us about why you were all over Europe, all through the 80s and 90s. And he did. So he tells about what happened that got to the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People and how they got the vote. And then also all the diplomatic relations, including Alec Denny going over and having the Austrian chancellor, accepting Mi'kmaq people as a nation. And when he put on his the wampum, which we gave to him, that we strung ourselves, and we said, Alec, this is not to put on anybody's head. It's just you hand him the wampum. It's to be read. And so Alec goes there and he tries to get it over his head, and it gets stuck on his nose. And he says to the chancellor, he says, "You're just like me. We got big noses, and I can't get this over your head. You got the same problem as I do." And everyone laughed, and it was crazy, kind of funny thing. But it really kind of set a nice mood for things. But anyway, Russell tells some wonderful stories about that. In addition to those, we have Jaime's story about his going to school and his anecdotes about being in our family and listening to Alec Denny. And then he goes to college and he has a teaching with Joe B. Marshall, who talks about the Gabriel Syliboy case and how that occurred. And as he went to law school, how he began to write a paper on that and learn more about the case of Gabriel Syliboy and the Simons case. And so it really kind of gives you an inside look at a particular case and how it fits into our life today. And he also ends by asking for a pardon for Gabriel Syliboy for his family. So Stephen Augustine also is in there, and he talks about his family and how he's learned and how that learning comes from multiple generations, but also about those historical relations of treaties with settlers and the importance of the renewal process that was reenacted at St. Anne's Mission, and as well as the issues of the peace and friendship treaties and to distinguish those as being those from the numbered treaties and how they were done. Naomi Metallic's father, and many of you may know, was Manny Metallic. And Manny Metallic was one of the experts in language. And his work was, he built a whole grammar and everything, but he didn't teach his daughter the language. And she asked, "Why didn't you teach it to me?" And of course, you know, he said, well, you were learning French and English, but she also realizes also that it came in a time of a colonial history when Mi'kmaq language was not a favored language and was given such a negative outlook on life that is basically what he went through. And then Patrick Augustine is another one of the doctoral students who comes from Elsipogtog, and he sketches a few of the foundations or core foundations of Indigenous law. And Indigenous law is really about what we do and how we do things. And so he comes about talking about issues of the 6 worlds, Netagulum harvesting, the traditional districts, and the impacts on Mi'kmaq. So what I would say is that these give you a snapshot of some of the things that have been thought through. And these are thought through only because they are personal and they affect the individuals in some way. What we're looking for are more writers and more aspects of this, to find people who are passionate about one little thing in their life that comes and tells us how they learned it from their ancestors, how they learned it from people, and how they have come to understand it today in their life. Because of one of the things that we need to understand, that treaty education is not about a treaty that tells us what we can do or can't do, and it isn't about a law that the province accepts or doesn't accept. It's really about how we live in ourselves, how we live with our families, how we live as a Mi'kmaq, that brings both the theory or the explanation of who we are together with the methodology and the behavior and the animation of who we are as one. And that is what we're looking for, is a story that combines that knowledge with how do we live it. That's it. There.
Okay, we'll take a few short questions, maybe about 5 minutes worth of questions.
Because I took too long, I'm sorry.
Going once.
What? What?
That's what happens when you get somebody so smart.
Well, she'll be here all day today and tomorrow if the questions do pop up. With that, I would like to thank Dr. Marie Baptiste for coming this way, and on behalf of the Mi'kmaq and the people in the tripartite MK, we'd like to give you a small gift for your appreciation. Thank you very much for your presentation. Up next, we're moving right along. We're going to have. Can we use your computer? Okay, we're going to try to do this, but we're having Lena Rosenmeyer and Melody Martin, who I've worked with over the past 4 years, I'd say 5 years, in terms of looking at curriculum and what we call teaching about Mi'kmaq, which I haven't. Hello. Move my hand. Oh, I'm covering the mic. That's the rock star in me. I want to grab the microphone and pull a Leroy Denny and throw it on the floor after I'm done, but I'm not going to do that. So I've been working with Leah and Melody on this project. I've seen it develop from the discussions with elders and people around the various areas. I know that there are people in the room who are also a part of their the curriculum, the development. I know Carrie's a part of that as well. I've seen Sister Dorothy. A lot of good people have been involved for the past 5 years to create this curriculum that's come from just discussions to being teachables to having a large book around that. And so we're going to get the presentation set up, and I'm going to turn that over to Leah and Melody to come up and give a presentation. Thank you. So without further ado, Leah, Melody. Mom.
Which one? Yellow?
I'll pass it to you.
Which one is it, Leah, that you wanted? Leah?
Oh, sorry. Draft 19, February 2015. Thank you.
Is it a PowerPoint?
Nice.
Is it a PowerPoint?
No, it's just a PDF. We're just going to skip
Oh,
through
okay,
pages.
all right.
That's like a lot.
He's the boss.
No, you can't. Can't be. There's also a website you can go to, right? Noted? This is a lot. Yeah. You go to a website that this item is at.
You guys, we printed to the very last minute. We could yesterday, but we only got 30 printed for time. So if anybody doesn't get a copy who wants a copy, just let me know and we'll send it. It's going to be online and in real print in 8 weeks. So, Marlene is in our office. Is there anybody who didn't get a copy who wants one?
All good? Okay, let's go. Okay, my name is Melody Martin Gugu, and I'm really excited because I don't have to take attendance, and I have people who are actually listening to me, and nobody throwing spitballs at me, and but then again, I saw Leroy here, so I don't know. No. Yeah, so this is my colleague Leah Rosenmeyer, and she works for Mi'kmaq Way de Burt. I'm a mainly grade 8 teacher, so I'm a junior high school teacher at Truro Junior High in Tyrone, Nova Scotia. So I became involved in this project way back in, I think it was 2012. 2000, oh my gosh, okay, 2010 or so, and it was a really interesting process, and it was probably the coolest educational experience of my life, because I got to sit on meetings with a group of elders in different, we categorized them in different areas, and I really learned a lot about how we were and how we are as Mi'kmaq people. So what we did was I sat on these meetings, and our elders shared stories with us, and a lot of our committee members are actually here. We've got Carrie, and Leroy was initially on the project, and Jaime, and Sister Dorothy, and I think that's who our committee members were. And I think what I'll do is I'll get Leah to introduce how the project came to be. And I knew it was dangerous passing this out to you, because I know you're going to be tempted to just not pay attention to me and just go through it. But I'm just going to ask you to follow along with us. Leah's going to talk a little bit about the project, how it came to be. I'll introduce it, and then I'll sort of just guide you through where we start mentioning treaties, and we'll skip to the contemporary section, and Leah will give an introduction to that, and then I'll take you through to the lesson ideas, and then we'll answer any questions that you might have. Does that sound good? Okay. So, Leah, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
So we just wanted to say really briefly how this came about, which is that at Mi'kmaq Way de Burt, we have a cross-cultural facilitator program, which is Gerald Glode, who I'm sure many or most of you know. And he's, unfortunately, there's only one Gerald Glode, but he can't be everywhere all the time. And so, and I asked Tim Bernard, who's my boss, the Director of History and Culture at the Confederacy, when we started this morning, and he said 2010, and I was like, yeah. So I'm glad I asked, because I would have told you a couple years ago earlier. In any case, so the idea behind this was simply that we were very aware that Gerald could never meet as many schools wanted to have him come and present, and that there were a lot of Mi'kmaq cross-cultural facilitators in the school system who weren't necessarily teachers or educators who are actually in the system, but who were always invited in to give content of one kind or another. And so this idea was born out of that we would create some content with a group of, people from the communities who defined what they wanted to say to the school system and within classrooms and with kids, and that we would try to make it available across the province and more broadly. And so that's what happened. So I would just, along with the people that Mela mentioned, if you go to page 6 in your piece there, you can see who the people are who have worked on this. And the way this, Darren's not here, but he asked the question this morning about, is content created to fit curriculum, or does content get created and you fit curriculum around it? And I just wanted to be clear that in this case it's the latter. So our process was that we brought everybody together and said, we think that there are 3 basic areas that we think people would like to work on. And this is partly in a lot of conversation with the Mi'kmaq Elders Advisory Council. And those areas were healing, contemporary issues, and Nadugalan. And so from there, this big group got broken into small working groups. So there's a Nadugalan working group, a contemporary issues working group, and a healing working group. They met individually on multiple occasions, defined what they wanted to say, figured out what the core themes and strategies were that are contained here. And then Melody, we came back and worked on what were the actual strategies of implementation for that content. And then we brought the whole group back together, and those of you who are in the whole group will remember that we had to do that multiple times, which was very important. But we didn't call when this project was done. The group called the project being done. So the last time we met, we said, "Are you sure you're comfortable? We're going to go off and finish these pieces." Yeah, it was okay. So, but we did, we have part of our extended timeline has to do with that, but we felt like that was very important. And the other thing I want to say is, because I know Mello won't say it, is having Mello be a part of every single piece of what's in here was hugely important. So, and maybe everybody knows this, but just that in classroom, her saying like, well, what's the Black Line Master going to look like? And me 5 years ago saying, what's a Black Line Master? So really the in classroom pieces getting developed out were so important. And then again, everything went back for approval. So then the other piece is we didn't always know what the strategy for in classroom use was going to be, but one of the things that came out was Mello always sort of said, well, I could write a story about that. Well, I could write a story about that. And what you'll see through this is there's a lot of stories. And, that sort of seems obvious in hindsight, but it's something that grew organically through this process. And we think that's super important. So, so we're grateful to her for that. And then the last thing I just wanted to say before I sit down and be quiet is if you go to page 10, you'll just see the, we were going to show this. I'm not following along. Do people need the screen? Are we okay with paper? We're okay. We're okay with paper. No. Screen. If you go to page 10. I do. Thank you. So if you go, so here we are on page 10. I just wanted to explain how this whole piece is structured, because I think it helps us, as we go through, you'll see different pieces. So the way it was broken out was primary to 3, 4 to 6, and 7 to 9. So each of the groups I talked about earlier came together and they said, okay, what are we going to do for primary to 3? What are the learning outcomes that we want for that group? What is it for 4 to 6? What is it for 7 to 9? So expressing emotion, diversity and awareness, and then the residential school are the healing subjects. in contemporary issues, the Maui-Omi treaties, which we're going to spend obviously some time on. That's why we're here today, is because of this unit in grades 4 to 6. And then land loss and displacement. And then for Nadugalim, Msit Nokma, traditional knowledge and stories of Mi'kma'ki. So that's the way the whole piece is structured. And I don't know when, maybe was fairly recently, like a year ago, as we were going through all this, we realized that for a lot of teachers, they just needed a basic introduction. So the introduction that you see has been added on as sort of just a general piece for the teacher or the student or whomever that just doesn't have any base at all. So I think that helps set out how we're going to move forward. Am I being clear? Any questions? Okay. Oops. You good?
Okay, so our goal, of course, in our conversation was the fact that we live in Mi'kma'ki and our children are being educated, and they're being educated by educators who are not really teaching them about Mi'kma'ki and who Mi'kmaq people are. And even talking about treaties isn't just about our history, it's about everybody's history in Mi'kma'ki. And our students aren't being, I felt like our students aren't being taught about who the Mi'kmaq people are. And so if you turn to the introduction, my welcoming page, on page 7, I take a moment to reflect on what our goals was in creating this piece, and with our hope that our educators would help all of the people who live in Mi'kma'ki learn about the history and the culture and the stories of our people. Because the stories don't just belong to us, they belong to all people who live in Mi'kma'ki today. Turning to page 25, this is our introductory section. And in the introduction on page 25, this is where we first start to talk about treaty relationships. So we give a brief introduction about who the Mi'kmaq people are, and we introduce the concept of treaty relationships here. Keeping in mind that this resource is created for educators because when we think about how we want our educators to be taught, we want them to have a resource where they can go to and be confident in knowing that the information that they have is really important and really true to our people. On page 27, there's an image there of, and it's talking about the moose hunt in Unama'ki. So we talk about that there. And then if you turn to section 89, page 89, this is the contemporary issue section. And each section opens up with an introduction, but it also has the curriculum outcomes that we wanted our teachers to know and to have confidence that if they cover this, that their outcomes will be covered. A lot of teachers express concern that they really want to get their outcomes covered, and you can meet a lot of outcomes, especially with English language arts, by teaching this content. I think it was a selling point for me as a teacher. So we have our introduction, introducing the contemporary issues section, and on page 90, we have our core themes and issues. You'll notice there that we also have a teacher tip, and the teacher tips are sprinkled throughout the resource, and it just gives a tip on a little bit of heads up of what teachers should be aware of. For example, this one on page 90 reads, "The introduction from page 15 to 38 is key to much of the contemporary issues content. The activities in the introduction will also adapt well to these units." We have our teaching strategies, and then we have our focus. So grades 4 to 6 will focus on treaty education. And if you turn directly to page 105, this is our introduction to treaties. So Leah, do you want to do the introduction, and then I'll go through the core activities?
Sure.
Okay.
I won't say too much here, except that we worked hard on this language, and particularly the piece that's in bold there. Treaties are an agreement between nations that are binding until they are changed by mutual agreement. So that was something that we worked on with Jaime and Carrie and others for, it was a couple hours, as I recall, and we've been through that a lot. So we've drawn a little bit on the Mi'kmaq, on CAMKNO's website and some of their treaty definitions, which you'll see actually on page 106, just goes through and gives a short summary of some of the most important treaties. There was also a lot of conversation about which treaties were included, which ones weren't, with some space issues. So that was the final group that we ended up with. And and then also this morning the issue about Mi'kmaq title came up, and so we have addressed that a little bit, but I think just clarify, we didn't go into that, we didn't address that deeply here for sure. So, good.
So on page 107, we introduce the activities with a treaty true and false activity. So a lot of when we're trying to think about strategies, I think a lot of things that came out was the fact that we like to discuss things, and discussion is really valuable in the classroom, and I think a lot of educators don't realize how valuable that is. So we have here a treaty true and false. For example, we have some common misunderstandings, which may include the Mi'kmaq sold their land and their rights to it. Treaty rights are special, and therefore the Mi'kmaq people are getting special rights. Treaties are valid and have significant legal standing. As treaties are implemented, land will be taken away from current owners. So that helps open up discussion about that. And then we have two images of the 1752 treaty, and then we have some copies of original treaties and documents.
Yeah, proclamation of it.
Yeah. 110 has an opening activity, and a lot of these activities I was able to do with my own classrooms, and they worked out really well. So this word scramble is just an opening activity for teachers to start talking about and dialoguing about what treaties are. And we have a blackline master here where teachers could increase the font if they wanted to, and pardon?
Do you have scissors?
Oh, and you can rip it up with your teeth if you wanted to. No. So you can photocopy this, cut it up, put them into little envelopes, give them out to the groups of kids, and it sounds so simple, but kids love competing with one another, and by putting them into groups and saying, okay, whoever goes first is the winner. They just scramble, and trying to figure it out is fun, like how they think they have it figured out, and you go over there and you're like, nope, that's not right. So they have to go back, and it was a fun activity. So I thought it was a good opening activity, and it gets them thinking about what a treaty is. And then we have the next opening activity on page 112. We are all treaty people. I think that's a really important statement. We are all treaty people. So that gives us an opportunity to look at that statement. We have here the blackline master where, a teacher can photocopy this and get the kids to draw images, put graffiti on here, write poetry, do whatever they want to show their understanding of we are all treaty people. And then we have a classroom activity, and this was inspired by the resource Contemporary Struggles, Rethinking Columbus. One time I was able to go to Foxwoods, and I'm not a gambler, so all my friends were gambling, and I was at the gift shops, and I found this cool book, Rethinking Columbus, and I got to read through it while everyone was doing their thing. And this was adapted from that resource. And basically what it is, you know, coming into the classroom, offering a small treat, you know, anybody want toonie? And of course somebody's going to jump up, and it just gives them an opportunity to understand the whole process of treaty making. And then we have a treaty here, and we get someone to sign it. And of course they're going to sign it without realizing what it says, and then you have this whole discussion about language barriers, etc. And then we have on page 117 an extension activities where you could create a debate in the classroom, and you can even create a classroom treaty. My class did the creation of the classroom treaty, and we agreed on something called Freaky Friday. They came up with it. And Freaky Friday is where the kids get to sit out of their seating plan, and they get to listen to their music as they work. And we're not allowed to use our telephones in our classroom in my school. And our telephones, that even sounds a lot, I mean our cell phones. And, they have to sit in a seating plan in my classroom. So being able to choose to sit with a friend on Friday and listen to your music while you're working is a big deal to them. So they came up with that, and we created a treaty, and if they break their agreements during the week, then they don't get to honor that treaty on Friday. So that's an example that a teacher could use in her classroom, or his classroom. On page 118, we have taking a closer look, examining Mi'kmaq treaties. We also have an extension of talking about Donald Marshall Jr. And then we have an activity where you can even go to the website world.net, and you can create a Wordle on their whole understanding of treaties. We have our curriculum outcomes listed on page 119 and 120. And then that concludes our treaty unit. But if you switch to page 199 in our Nedugalum unit, we look at the film Seeking Nedugalum, and it talks about two-eyed seeing, and Carrie's in there talking about going eeling, and I think it's really valuable. So that's also mentioned in here. And that's basically what we talk about in treaties in this resource. I have to mention when Marie talked about the fact that our learning is so whole, I smiled to myself, because when we were doing when we were in the healing unit, and in one of the units there, I was trying to take all of this information that the elders were sharing with me, and I was like, I'm learning so much about everything, like with Nedugalum and healing, and I was like, how am I going to create an activity or a strategy to like put in a box and deliver to these kids? And I had a hard time thinking about it, and one night I just woke up and I started writing this story, and it turned into this story about a Giju who takes her grandchild out, and they go picking mayflowers, and while they're picking mayflowers, she teaches her daughter about all of these different concepts and languages involved, and so I think you'll like that story. Does anybody else have any questions? Yeah, our Millbrook students go to the provincial school. Yeah.
What's the interactions or the questions?
What do you mean?
From the non-English students?
What?
When you teach modules, or how's it like?
Well, at the beginning, I was grade 9 social studies. I had a student talk about how they think racism has ended. There's a lot of misunderstandings. There's a lot of views that come from home that comes through them, and being in grade 9, they're not, once they're comfortable with one another, they're not afraid to express those views. So you get a lot of misunderstandings and stereotypes coming through them, and they feel comfortable enough to address them, and we discuss it. So, does that answer your question? Yeah. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
Amazing amount of work.
Thank you. It was a really amazing time working with this group of elders, because this resource, if you think about going to Costco and you're walking along shopping and you get those samples, this is the samples of the learning that needs to be done. And there's so much. This is going in the final editing. It was sent to the publisher.
It's at Eastern Woodland Print Communications just for file preparation, so they have to go through and be sure the artwork is right, you know, color type and that kind of thing. So, yeah, so we think it's going to the printer in 2 weeks, and it's supposed to come back from Winnipeg in 6 to 8 weeks after that. But, you know, having said that, you know, we can't add whole pages or sections at this point, and Ian and Wyatt will kill me for saying this, but if you notice anything in here that, you know, oh, I wish they tweaked that, or I wish this was spelled, or whatever, we would love to hear from you, and there is time for us to go, you know, we will proof the pages, so we have one last go at being able to put changes in, so if there's anything here that's hitting you wrong, we did, Mello and Gerald, we did present this at Old Louis Siltonage last year, 2
Yep.
years ago. So we got great feedback there, and we incorporated that to the best of our knowledge. And so if there is anything, we would really encourage.
Just one more question maybe on top of that. And this is something that's going to be endorsed by Mi'kmaq or by MK, or is this something is this a working?
This is available, this will be available online, and it's my understanding that there will be professional development opportunities in our provincial school systems.
Yeah, so the curriculum will be at mi'kmawidivert.com or mi'kmawidivert.ca. And you'll be,
I just have one request for you guys. Do not get the Department of Education to print this. Take it to Eastern Woodland Publishing, please.
It is.
it's actually,
Years to print.
Well,
Tim
Eastern
is
Woodland
sending it off to
Publishing.
the best printer he knows, which is in Winnipeg, and it's called, I can't remember what the print, anyway, it's going to a very good printing press, so we are expecting an excellent product on the other side, which I've never printed with the Department of Education, so I'm not saying anything about them.
Sister Dorothy?
And help with this got 10 kids.
Sister Dorothy?
Despite what Dewey just said. No offense. Anyway, explain your cover page to us.
The cover page is,
Is that the 7 districts?
1, 2, 3,
Storytelling.
I believe so. Gerald created this image.
7 districts in the Grand Chief.
Yeah.
Gerald, we have to say really, you know, Gerald has both helped create content, but also he's done like the vast majority of artwork in this whole thing, from little things to big things. And that's his drawing there, and it's called, he named it Storyteller. So he's not here today, but I think he would say that it's to be the storyteller.
Yeah.
You know,
Amazing. I'm just blown away here.
Yay!
I'm just like, yes, yes, yes.
Awesome.
the other thing I thought this group might appreciate is from G. Captain's comments this morning about stereotypes. If you go to page 31 and 31, we did 2 pages of stereotypes on those pages. And we had pictures of Justin Bieber and his tax comment, and we had pictures of Tiger Lily from Peter Pan, and we had pictures of a kid at Amazon with a tomahawk. It really spoke to the
Pocahontas.
stereotypes you were mentioning this morning. And we worked so hard with those guys to get us permission to allow us to use those images, and nobody would let us use those images. And that was true for Rolling Stone. It was true for H&M, because they had a recent headdress that got pulled. It was true for Disney. So we had to reset those pages, but it speaks a little to who's got control over what and the UN proclamation pieces, and we were super frustrated. So we like how those pages came out, but I thought that this group might be interested just to hear that they had said no to us. And the website, you want me to put it up?
Just mentioned because you mentioned the website before, really just that it is a full interactive website with more than just the resource on it. There's also videos of Gerald telling stories,
Oh,
elders discussions, and it's also narrated in Mi'kmaq and in English, so that's.
Yeah, our website went live in the fall, also after too long a time period, but we worked really hard on it. A lot of Gerald's videos, as Ian said, are up there. A lot of the content on the website is integrated into this, so it'll say, go see that story or whatever. But part of our hope is that teachers will see the number of resources that are there, and there's also a supplementary material that, like all the Blackline Masters teachers can download individually and just print them off as they need them. And we got some great permissions from people.
And the resource itself will include a DVD, right?
Yes, yeah, it's going to have a DVD. So the actual paper, the real like hard copy will have, it won't be hardbound, a soft cover, but the back cover will have a DVD in it with the whole versions of everything and everything downloadable. Also, everything's up on the website.
And the actual resource will have perforated pages.
Oh, right. This is mellow.
and it'll be
This is
hole
like-
punched.
yeah.
Yep. So that the Blackline Masters can come out and then pop back into a binder.
And the perforation is on the right side on the left side of the hole punch, and yeah, so.
Okay.
Josephine had a question there, so I have two questions.
I'm just wondering here, like, okay, the location for the story for the whole California. Like, like some of the pictures have different names than we have. For example, on page what? It's just the rough drawings or whatever. What page there? Or is it these?
Oh, yeah, that's the sequencing activity in Ndugalam. Yeah, page,
There's no page three. I'm just wondering, maybe what I have to localize me for where I work from.
well, I can tell you how we dealt with translation, and I'm sure all the speakers will appreciate that translation is a complicated thing. So Patsy Paul Martin, a lot of the time we started with the Elders Advisory Council, and they helped us with initial translations. And then Patsy Paul Martin took responsibility for all the translations. So she's gone through, and she knows that there will be conversation about it. And so if there's any question, she's ready to talk about it with anyone who wants to talk about it. We really wanted language in as much as we could get it, and we know there will be differences as we go. There's also a piece Mello wrote on language in the introduction that actually talks about different spellings from different and dialects from different parts of Mi'kmaq. So that's also in here. I don't know if that answers, but
194, why in Algonquin, canoe?
They are our brothers in spirit.
I have
You know,
to,
big one had to raise tongue like Unaptik, maybe I would.
yeah, for ocean. I could ask Gerald that, and I'll bring that back to him. It may be that that's his river version as opposed to the ocean version, but
Maybe there
he's not
needs to
here,
be,
so I can't answer.
A heading there.
Yeah, could be. We could explain that. There's an opportunity for explanation there. But that's the kind of thing we can do right now, so that's helpful.
Emily, on the interactive website, is there an auditory guide for pronunciations?
Not
No,
at this point.
it's something we talked about, Mello wanted, but what we've done is try to link to the help desk for pronunciations. So that's been a teacher tip we've put in throughout,
I recommended that, but I think it came down to funding, right?
and just
For that.
time for everything. Frankly, we're,
As you know, the non-native teacher would anglicize it like.
Yeah, yeah.
Which loses everything that you're in.
well, at least it gets it in there.
Marie?
How are you going to in-service for teachers this thing? Have you put together an in-service package to go with it?
Not yet. I don't think we're there yet.
There have been a number of
Because
conversations.
really, if you don't in-service it, they take it out and they say, oh, I like that one, but I don't like that one.
Yep.
You know, so you've got to lead them through how and why it's important to go through the process from beginning to end, or can they, flip around and do that kind of thing? Is that?
It was, we discussed that, and we know in a perfect world, we would want it that way. But we understand it probably won't happen that way, so we created this with the understanding that if they pick something out of here and they teach it, then we wanted to have confidence that we felt that it was okay that they did that.
There have been some initial conversations with the department about how to, and I think Jennifer Burke, who's a social studies consultant, had suggested that we put it on their wiki. I think there's still questions about how that would best happen and how we reach the greatest number of teachers. So I think that's a conversation to be had, right?
Okay, Andale and Jeff, and then
No, I'm just looking at the treaties. I'm just wondering why the 1776 Watertown Treaty was not listed.
Jaime?
didn't you guys get that specifically from Mi'kmaq Rights Initiative website?
I don't know, we filtered it through you, though.
That's all your fault.
I'm just throwing it out there just for the fact that
And if that's, I mean, we can now go back and put that in. We have, with the group, which did include Jaime, but also other people, it was, this was the final list, but if that's important, we will hear you and take it back and talk with Tim and Don about it.
the First Nation to recognize the most powerful nation in the world,
Yeah, just speaking Marie's comment about a teacher in service, just reminds everyone that tomorrow, really, the whole day is focused on how do we move forward from the knowledge of what is treaty education to how do we implement it deeply, fully, and sustain it in schools. So that question that Marie raised is really, to me, the heart of what we talked about moving forward tomorrow. So we'll put our hearts and souls into that tomorrow.
Cool.
All right, I'd like to just conclude that for that presentation, and I'd like to thank Melody and Leah for their time and give them a small token of our appreciation for the great work that they've done and for the presentation. Now, like Jeff just said, tomorrow is all about that, is about hearing about all the good things that we've done, but figuring out how to get that to the broader Nova Scotia schools. So that's the work in front of us. Right now, I'd like to take a 5-minute health break, and come back, and we'll hear our next presenter, Annie Johnson, and we'll get into the discussion on how we move forward. So 5-minute health break, and we will reconvene shortly.
we're able to do a lot of good things and to keep these programs going, to keep funding going to things that mean a lot to the Mi'kmaq people. So kind of, like I said, that wasn't really UINR's thing. Or we didn't, it's more like, it's not that we don't want to do it, it's more like we didn't want to step on any toes. We know there's some great organizations out there. We know that there's the whole education system, there's MK. We figured that that's kind of their thing and not us. And now everybody on the camera at home is going to see me talking with my hands, so I'm going to try to, I don't know what to do with my hands. So we developed the Mi'kmaq Environmental Learning Center, or MILC, which is cute because when we ask for funding, I'm looking for milk money. As a tribute to our elders, and our hope is eventually we're going to have charitable status under MILC. So UINR right now is a nonprofit organization, but we're not charitable status. We're hoping that MILC is going to be kind of a sister organization. We do all of their things separately, and hopefully sometime in the future that they're going to have charitable status for easier funding. So like I said, it's a really community-driven initiative, MILC. It came up as something that the elders requested us. How do we get that knowledge, not just to you guys, but to the next generations? How do we transfer that knowledge? So we've been trying to figure out ways how do we do environmental education? And like I said, Shelley Denny, she's done a lot of work with different species, eel in particular, salmon in particular, striped bass, and so she's got a lot of background on a number of species. And then Albert Marshall is our senior advisor at UINR, and he's our, you've all heard of the two-eyed seeing concept. So everything we do at UINR, we incorporate two-eyed seeing, where it's just a given for us. It's not something that we have to do. And I know when we first approach some governments, and the relationships have gotten better over the years. Like I said, I've been there for 10 years now, which makes me feel old. But then, hey, you have Lisa, who's been there longer than me, and Charlie Dennis, and they're going to. When you first approach governments and you approach them with this project idea, say you want to bring elders and youth together and you want to talk about salmon, for example, they're like, well, that doesn't really, what are you going to accomplish? Like, if it doesn't fit in a certain box, then it's difficult for them to comprehend. But we've shown them over the years the different projects that we've been doing, the success of the projects that we've been doing, and the real on-the-ground work that happens. And people love it. So we have a lot of good relationships with different government departments, both on the federal and provincial levels, even non-governmental organizations, a couple of industry partners. So I don't know if this is too small for you to see, but we established this in 2010. So it's approaching 5 years, but it's still fairly new as far as it's. When I say new, it's like UINR has some core funding. We've got a lot of different projects. MILC has little mini projects that kind of keep it going through the years. And Jaime mentioned, I did this presentation to the Tripartite Education Group with Nadine Lafort, and she's since actually moved on. She took a different role. She took a job with Parks Canada. We were sorry to see her go, but really, she's been working the last 2 years, struggling to. We have to find funding as she's working sometimes, and you don't know, like, next month if you're going to have funding. So I couldn't blame her for going, but at the same time, it is a loss to us. With that being said, we're definitely going to keep moving forward. We are going to, it's not like because we lost that staff member, we don't want to do the environmental education that we've been working towards. And I'm going to go through this, and I've left on each of the tables, except for that one, sorry, a copy of a draft lesson plan that we've developed on a species, eel. So I see some people sort of passing around a paper. It's one lesson plan, so it's all together. So just quickly, I'll run through the goals, and it's kind of Good news, bad news for the people who have seen this before. Like the bad news is that you've seen it before. The good news is that you told me you really enjoyed it, so you get to see it again. So the goals of Milk are to collect and preserve traditional Mi'kmaq knowledge on environmental sustainability, to create and deliver environmental education programs that will promote and share Mi'kmaq traditional knowledge on environmental sustainability, and to partner with other groups who are sharing the same desire to promote environmental sustainability for the benefit of future generations. And just listening to some of the presentations that I've heard today, at first when I was invited here, and Jaime said, it might be a good idea for somebody from UINR to sit in on this treaty education thing. And I said, well, and treaties, you know, like that's to me, that's the lawyer stuff, and we're not lawyers at UINR. But I can already see the potential for a lot of collaboration between the people that have worked here today. I know Dr. Marie Batiste, she talked about her current project of gathering stories and stuff. We've actually just heard that my Elder and Youth Committee was approved for a project that I put in last year. We're going to be collecting legends from around the Brador Lakes. So we're going to bring elders and youth together, because when we do bring them together, let's say we wanted to, like once we wanted to talk about Bearishwa Ponds, specifically Bearishwa Ponds. The Bearishwa Pond discussion turned into a really cool discussion about ghost stories. And the scientist that was with us that day, some of you guys might know Dr. Bruce Hatcher at CBU. He's his words are very long. He doesn't mean to be, he's definitely not like a stuffy type at all, but he's very academic. But even he was getting kind of trying to figure the link between ghost stories and Bearishwa Ponds, and maybe Bearishwa Ponds, you know, they're like it's quite a unpredictable place in the winter. You don't really know. Sometimes it's frozen solid, sometimes it's not. Water's always moving. So maybe people died there, and maybe that's why their ghost is there. And it was amazing to see this very academic gentleman taking these legends that elders were sharing with us. And of course, as soon as somebody mentions a ghost story, then I got 5 other people popping up with ghost stories, and I'm trying to write everything down, and I'm listening in Mi'kmaq and writing in English, and going. I get like 18 pages of notes at every elders meeting. So some of the things that Milk has done, like I said, we've done little projects. This is a picture of our camp. We've done 3 years now. We call it Nigani Autigan, or sort of like a trailblazing. Our camp, this was this past year. It's a camp that it started out as a project with, I think, a forestry initiative, and it was going to be very geared towards training young people for careers in natural resources. Unfortunately, the funding, there was an election, and the priorities for that particular funding stream changed. So they said, this is not something that we're going to be doing anymore. But we had already put so much background work into it. We said, no, we're going to do it anyway and look for funding. We still keep it very much training oriented, but the whole 2IZ concept too. So we have first aid training, we have boating safety, we have WMIS, stuff like that. And then we have, like Carrie Prosper comes in and does a whole day of eeling right out from the mornings. They go out to harvest the spears, the trees to make spears. All afternoon they're carving them, they're stripping the bark off, and then they're eating lunch, they're eating dinner, and then at night we go out eeling. And kids have an amazing time with it. There was one girl, she was just so proud of her spear. She didn't even, I don't think the concept of eeling appealed as much as, look, I made a spear. These are our Unama Kids. Unama Kids was a program that was born before Milk. It was under UINR. It was our youth thing. It's grade 6 students, and traditionally we asked the teachers in the schools to pick 2 students from grade 6, and we got them together. We took them on field trips and stuff, different things. When we had our Moose Feast in the Highlands, they would come down. Now it's kind of delving into more. It's like, especially when Nadine was here, it's very open to. Like she's done presentations from grade 4 to 6 now, and we call them all Unama Kids. So these are going to be the future stewards of our future environmental ambassadors, right? Going into the older grades. We've done a lot of publications. This is our latest one, Mullaguage. And Mullaguage, if you guys know Charlie Joe Dennis, Mulla is very near and dear to his heart. And we've done a lot of work at the Mullaguage Cemetery with the erosion problems there over the last number of years. So we have a lot of backgrounds and a lot of stories about Mulla. We also did a project with Nova Scotia Community Cultures and Heritage that enabled us to put a monument at Mulla, and it's this archway. When I first put the proposal in for this monument, I thought it was going to be like a stone with people's names on it and stuff. But we brought the elders together, and they're trying to figure out what would be appropriate. I have a list of people who are buried at the cemetery, but they say that's not a complete list. How do we do something without leaving people out? So this really nice archway was a guy that works with metal. I forget his name now. The artist said he has a couple of things at that old Tarpon site too. But the metal in the archway is designed so that as it gets weathered, it'll be its own specific colors. And at the annual mass last summer, when we put it up and we kind of unveiled it for the first time, did the ribbon cutting ceremony. Flo Young cut the ribbon for us, and we heard people kind of saying, "Oh, it'd be nice if that was painted." Like, no, it's supposed to look like that, and it's going to look different as it goes. So I kind of explained UINR already and why we have milk now. UINR is still going strong. This is our 1999 we started. This is my 10th year there. I really enjoy it. It's not only a great place to work, but the stuff that you do, like the projects that you're doing, the work that you're doing on the ground, the people that you're working with, it's easy to be able to see results. Even if you're planting a tree, you don't see the tree like right away, but like we did a tree planting ceremony here in Membertou because of all the development that's happening in Membertou. We did a tree planting thing 2 falls ago. And Chief Terry was part of it, and a lot of community members came to get trees for their properties. We planted trees in different areas, and I mean stuff like that. It's just to see people coming out and being so grateful for something like that. Like you always see that sort of gratitude, and to me that's amazing. And working with the elders too, they're always so appreciative of the work we're doing using the knowledge that they're giving us. Speaking of the knowledge that they're giving us, so I said we've got a lot of work on very specific subjects or specific species, I should say. These are just 3 of our books on striped bass, salmon, and cod, or beju, blamu, and jigo. We also have the information in these books is gathered from we have a solid Western science perspective in Shelley Denny's work and different biology and different, she goes back and talks to, looks at academic journals and scientific journals and stuff like that. And we also have the traditional knowledge perspective with elders. So we get information from them depending on what we're talking about. I know that meeting there, the little one where we're sitting on the couch, that was about, the stories we gathered there are the stories that are in the Mulla book. And you see Joe Gugu, and I see Joe Gugu in the back, and he said, you're gonna think I'm Neligwad, you see me everywhere. But his story is in the Mulla book. As part of our, this is did eels change the course of history? That was a project we first worked on with Parks Canada. When Parks Canada 2 years ago was doing its Louisbourg 300 celebration. Louisbourg turned 300 years old, and they wanted to do something that was Mi'kmaq related. And Albert Marshall had this legend, and it's a legend about eels potentially changing the course of history at Louisbourg, at the fortress. Basically, eels caused the fortress to fall, and you'll have to watch the video to figure out We have Diam's Promise too. Diam's Promise is also a kid's book now, because we did a book on moose, a traditional knowledge book, and we started doing kids' books. And the first one we did was about the eel, and it was so well received. Every time we ordered some to get printed, they were all gone. We distributed them to schools all over Nova Scotia. There's the Diam, this is our story. That's got part of that Diam's Promise in there. So that's our Diam kids book. That's our Diam traditional knowledge book. We did a series of videos on eels, 10 short videos. Anything you want to do about eels, Kerry could tell you all about them because he's starring in most of them. But even like from spearing an eel to cooking a traditional dish. There's 10 little videos on our website about eels. Shelley she was covering eels for a number of years under the Aboriginal Funds for Species at Risk, because eel is a species at risk now. Or the American eel is a species at risk now. So this was a poster that she designed. She actually took it to a big conference in Quebec, and that was really well received there. It's a poster she designed, and I think she wanted to make this into sort of a placemat. I think that's still in the works. For, I don't know for where. I think she mentioned like the Wamcook Center and things like that. So this is the front cover of our Gut-Off book, our traditional knowledge book, and just one of the pages from inside. This is the traditional knowledge book. This is the kids book, the one that I told you was super popular. And the kids book is basically a story. This one is an eel telling a story, like, you know, hello, my name is Eel. This is how we, you know, this is how eels basically takes them through the course of a year. Then even the whole swimming out to the Sargasso Sea and everything. So, with Nadine's help, we started developing. We figured we'll take what we have the most information of, and we have a lot of information on eel. And so we're going to develop like educational curriculum around these species. So that's what I have. I have a draft of one of our lesson plans on the tables going around. It's a draft. We took it to the Tripartite Education Working Group. They really liked it, and they did say it's not like a Department of Education, you know, doesn't fit in the exact box, but we can make it fit any box. We can make it. We're pretty good at being able to meet the requirements of whatever is needed just to keep the projects going. We have this. We figure in the future we'll be able to develop lesson plans on all of our books. We have more books coming out. There's a book that's it's all written. It's in for translation right now, and the illustrations are being written. It's about forestry, told but as a Glooscap legend by the pine marten, as the pine marten tells the legend or something like that. So it's about forestry. We have a guy on our staff who's got a degree in forestry. He works with Port Hawkesbury Paper. He works with us, but with Port Hawkesbury Paper, with contractors and everything. So he was able to contribute a lot of, like I said, the Western science stuff. And our elders are able to contribute a lot of the traditional knowledge stuff. So it's a really comprehensive book as far as two-eyed seeing goes. And we're going to do a film too. So if you notice the Legend series, they're available in 3 languages. Because we work with Parks Canada, we get them done in French too. So there's English, Mi'kmaq, and French. So there's always an English storyteller, a Mi'kmaq storyteller, and a French storyteller. And it's cool, the way they have them set up, it's kind of like they're sitting around a campfire and they're all telling the story at the same time. So you could see a totally French version if you wanted, or a totally Mi'kmaq version. But the main one, I think, you can kind of hear a little bit of each one. So that's what I took to the Tripartite Education Working Group, and I took to the Tripartite Culture and Heritage Committee. Basically, we want to keep going with this. We're trying to figure out where to get the funding for it. And that's why I have this budget in my presentation. It's the same presentation that they saw. But yeah, that's what we're doing. That's what we hope to do in the future. We want to continue with our environmental education. We think that there's a lot of like I'm hearing all this treaty education stuff today. There's a lot of different ways where, like, that's a draft lesson plan on eel, but there's also so much cultural lessons in it, and it definitely could tie with the treaty education. There's so much that you can learn from a species or have lessons tied around a species, where, like I said, I definitely see some opportunities for collaboration, and hopefully we'll be able to keep going with our other books and our other species. Any questions? Thanks, guys. If you hear of anywhere where I can get some milk money, you let me know.
Well, I'd just like to thank Annie for her presentation, and I thought her books are great. And I know I like showing my son Jacoby some of the stuff about the moose and the eel. And I think that's important for us for Mi'kmaq to know. Mi'kmaq Resources is a part of Mi'kmaq education, and with that, I'd like just a small token of our appreciation to Annie Johnsons for her presentation. Well, Annie.
Thank you.
Well, we've done a really good job today of getting through a lot of our presentations and our questions. Like I said, this isn't just about hearing presentations. We all have heard some of the good discussions, some presentations today. This is just the tip of the iceberg. We all know that there's other projects going on in other organizations, but it's this group right here that we need to get moving forward in order to make a treaty education strategy and bring up all these good things that are being done through the various Mi'kmaq organizations. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Orr now. He's going to be our facilitator, and him and John Jerome are going to do our facilitating. If you want to speak Mi'kmaq, John will interpret. If you're comfortable with English, Jeff will do it. And so I'm going to turn this over to Jeff Orr right now. And so we're going to try to get some discussion going. I know that there's people who won't be here tomorrow, and we really want to hear feedback from those people for sure. Okay. What do you need, Danny?
Unplug my. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jaime. I just wanted to say just a couple words to frame the discussion. It will be, as Jaime's mentioned, it's really just the beginning. That I think you used the word the tip of the iceberg. We've had today a lot of fantastic information. There's incredible knowledge, wisdom, and passion in this room around treaties and treaty education. There's a great desire to educate all Nova Scotians about the treaties and the relationships between Mi'kmaq, the Crown, and the settlers. Yet the real important thing I think we have to remember is that most Novas, and Marie really, her presentation really helped crystallize this, most Nova Scotians remain mostly to completely unaware of most of what was shared here today. The individuals in this room have, all of you have had a lifetime of commitment, and André talked about your father talking to you, the stories, this is part of your heritage, your identity. Yet the huge task ahead is, if we really want to talk about treaty education for all Nova Scotians, how do we diffuse this passion and this knowledge so that it happens in every classroom in Nova Scotia? In similar ways, Brenda talked earlier today about since 1989 you've been on this project in Saskatchewan. So the big question I think we have to begin with this afternoon is to think about some of the things that we heard today, and I'm going to suggest in a moment that we actually look in the booklet and take a few minutes to write down an idea.
and then we can have some discussion about it. And the idea that I think we want to leave here today with is, in each of our hearts, what is the one big idea? This one's mine, actually, but you can have it if you want it. One big idea that we heard today that we think is important for moving treaty education forward in the province. Now, we heard a lot of knowledge today about ideas, but how do we take that knowledge? And I was talking to Melody after her presentation, and I was saying, Melody, in your school, the Truro Junior High, you're the key knowledge keeper, the key person who knows most about treaty education and Indigenous knowledge. There's a whole continuum on her staff and on every staff in every school of knowledge and commitment. And she was agreeing that there are many individuals who have little to no knowledge. Those are the individuals that have the furthest to go, but that we can't ignore in this process. So that really is, it's really a humbling challenge when you think of it, how far so many people have to go. What I'm going to suggest is that we take about 5 minutes, and in this handout, there's 2 red papers. And if you go and find the second red paper, and then try and find this part of the booklet, it's after the second red paper, okay? Now, no pun intended, on red paper. There's a bunch of, it's about 4 pages that outline and I guess remind us of who spoke today. And what I just suggest that you do is just leaf through those 3 or 4 pages, and then when you come to page 7, there is mostly a blank page. After you have looked through, you don't need to write anything on those first 6 pages. But on the 7th page, if you would take a moment and write down one big idea that really stuck with you today that is important to remember. So I'm not thinking about a piece of knowledge, but what is important to consider when we think of implementing treaty education. So that is what I'm suggesting we take some time and jot down that one big idea, and that we be prepared in a few minutes to share that one big idea. So I'll just give you an example in case I'm being unclear. To me, the one big idea that's important is helping teachers unlearn what they know and learn new things in a deep way. So for me, that's something that I'm always on about in teacher education. Maybe something different for you. If you'd write down one big idea.
Somebody had good notes.
Maybe I need this mask. Does anybody here have Heine's notes?
I've been writing diligently all day. Someone took my notes.
I told you, I had it.
Oh, it was like, it was Cruz.
I told you, do you want it back? You said, you looked at me like I didn't know what I was talking about.
There we go.
There's extra ones here. Vicky doesn't know one.
That's good, that's good.
I sent a letter off, Don Dubois, who does the dictionaries, right? There we go. Huh? I said, can you send me some dictionaries? I'm teaching a course at school. Okay. And I looked at one of the dictionaries. I said, there's a whole bunch of writing. I looked at it. It's his notes, huh? All this change, this, can we go, whatever it is. I had it. I did send him a message. I'll see you in a couple of months. I'll give it back to you. So that was Patrick Cruz. I'm giving you back your notes.
I tried, you saw me. I tried.
We saw it. I was in that, don't need. Don't worry.
Got a lot on my mind.
I know what I know. You want me to start sharing?
Yes, John.
Okay, I'll share.
Get yours over with
One
first.
thing I picked up, and it's something, now you sort of talked about, but you never really digressed further, which is that whole notion. It isn't just education that we're talking about. When I was listening, we're not talking about education. We're talking about that relationship between two people who put their swords away, put their guns away, and I've said, okay, then we work together, and that relationship, at some point, you have benefits from having peace, from having that relationship, and that's what this discussion is about. Some of those beneficiaries are economic. Remember, and the question then becomes, as treaty beneficiaries, where are the economic benefits for our people? You sort of talked about that resources, having access to resources, having access to jobs, having access to an education system, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, that was my big idea there.
Okay, Elmer.
Miss Eleanor, okay.
Video odyssey, no?
Awesome. We use it.
Okay. Eleanor Bernard, Executive Director of Mi'kmaq and Algonquin. One of the things, Mubasag school man dan boy when we was a time to now yellow is was Mi'kmaq class because a Mi'kmaq language class. Da school does Mi'kmaq at then you know the time that's of course I'm for we are I'm for boy I'll explain it in English.
That's my job.
I don't think it should be just taught in Mi'kmaq studies. I don't think treaties or Mi'kmaq people or anything to do with Mi'kmaq people should be taught strictly in just Mi'kmaq language or Mi'kmaq studies courses. I think it should be incorporated into every course, everywhere you can. And I don't think our history courses should start with Mi'kmaq people and just have them as the first chapter. I think it should be incorporated throughout the whole history course itself. everywhere, every section of it, and how Mi'kmaq people interacted and lived with the non-Aboriginal or non-Mi'kmaq people. So I think, those are some of the things that really are important and should be considered when we begin to change curriculum for the Nova Scotia Department of Education.
Thanks, Dewey, and if we look back at what Saskatchewan did, they...
Translate that?
That's good. Yeah, I think so. It is infused everywhere. Ian, who works with, is former social studies teacher and works in Mi'kmaq services, what percentage of people take Mi'kmaq studies anyway? Probably 5 or 10% of high school students, maybe? Yeah. Yes. But the point being that not everyone gets it. Very few get it really, and it tends to silo that knowledge. Josephine.
I'm going to sit just in case I fall again. Okay. What is in English?
Whatever.
Teaching our children, because they are future leaders, the treaties that exist to this day, their implications and their impact on today's Mi'kmaq community. But on further, and to use these treaties with respect and for livelihood and not for recreational purposes only.
Thank you. Darren?
Darren Boone, Director of Education for America. I am sitting. No. I guess the big idea that I get out of this is that it's a question of why now. What is the crossroads that is defining our need to talk about treaty as a society now? And really, I think in Nova Scotia, we're at a crossroads. We have a generation of youth that is getting better educated about their rights and not getting so well educated about their responsibilities around treaty. And we have another segment of society that has no idea about rights or responsibilities around treaty. And the reason why we need to do it today and we need to do it now is because this is our opportunity to define the type of dialogue that will occur in this province between people, whether they're out getting eels or buying merchandise in the store. Now is an opportunity for us to define the conversation that will occur 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now.
Thank you, Darren. Yes, Janet? Janet?
Janet Porter, Department of Education, and I listened with that lens as a teacher and from the Department of Education throughout all the presentations today. And thank you all so much for your work and thank you for the inclusion and I really appreciate being here. One of the many things, as I said to Jeff, I had 3 others and he went by now, I'm about 6 now. But I was struck by what Marie had commented on with oral language and how our public school system puts greater value on the written language. And again, looking for a natural way to make links throughout our curriculum. I'd like to look at strengthening oral language, not just at the early elementary ages where it is a strong component of our curriculum, but throughout P as well.
Okay, thank you. Joe?
I'm Joe from Wigwa, and I'm the editor up here. And first of all, we got to teach our own kids for our treaty right. Teach them in our language and them to exercise our treaty rights. That's the way things are growing up. And we didn't have rights then. And I think we taught what our treaty is now and what we could do for our future generations.
Thank you, Joe. Sister, you had your hand up.
Listening to everything today, I'm such a visual person, I couldn't help but look at our treaty history as like a pillar that we have ignored all along. And I think it's our responsibility here to start to build up that pillar to make it strong and knowledgeable to not only our own people, but particularly to everyone in the public school system.
Thank you. Yes.
Future Department of Education.
For me, what was sticking out the most was talking about decolonizing the classroom. Because before we can even talk about trees in the classroom, we got to make sure that that actually happens, because we're talking about two different things. When we talk about trees, we all know what we're talking about. We're talking about that relationship. But when you look at it from a colonialism view, we're talking about ownership over something. So we got to keep in mind that when we're talking about decolonizing, we're also talking about probably 300 plus years of institutionalized and legal white supremacy that we fought here in Canada and in the United States. So before we can even start having those conversations about trees within the classrooms, we've got to make sure we're all talking about the exact same thing. So I think decolonizing and working on that piece is a lot most important in our classrooms.
Thanks, Jude. Haven't heard anything from the table in the back, the wise women back in the back corner here. Lorianne, Liz.
Speaking for the group, right?
We didn't even have a chat at the table, but anyway, I'll share my little bit. Lori and Celeste, I work with phenomenally, and I work with the First Nation School Success Program. And I think that we need to really get buy-in from the principals. Because, like Jeff said earlier, how goes the principal goes to school. And I really believe that in working with the school, we need to get that principal on board. And that way we can work with teachers to get them on board as well.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marlene Martin, Education Advisor with the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq. I guess basically what I was thinking is a little bit about what everyone else is saying. It's so important that we do have it inclusive, starting right from the get-go, right from preschool, if not even at home. And I've always been weary, or always been concerned about all the kids that we're not tapping into, especially in the schools that are way down, that we don't know anything about. What are they being taught? That's why it's so important that we do have it in the curriculum, because we want to make sure it's being taught the proper way and being taught the correct information, rather than like Judy said, never mind just grade 6 or one little chapter. So, and we're all at different levels, knowledge levels, and all our students will be at different knowledge levels. So I just think it's so important when we do this that we start early and it's inclusive, because and the teachers that are teaching it really know what they're talking about. Because otherwise, we'll be just going back to like when I was in school, right? Grade 6, little paragraph like that. So we want to avoid all that.
Steve.
Being at Woonamadi College, I think we need to have a stratified approach, beginning at the low level kindergarten all the way up to university, and then kind of approach the premiers and the Maritime Provinces Higher Education Commission, because every one of those institutions have to have a buy-in if we're going to move forward with anything, dealing with our treaties within the province, and not only just Nova Scotia, but it's important that I think we all need to get together, all the Mi'kmaq people, and have a more stratified approach to accessing those educational institutions, whether it's secondary school, primary schools, high school, or middle school, or universities. And I think it's important we have to stress that. I mean, that's my idea.
Thank you, Steve. Annie, did you have your hand up? I put itching powder all around the room, so that people do that.
So what I wrote down was collaboration. I don't think it's any one organization's or one person's responsibility to go forward with implementing trade education. I think just looking at this room as an example, and I've heard buy-in a couple times, if we have the buy-in of all the organizations represented in this room, then that would go a lot further than, say, Department of Education saying, okay, we're going to put it in the curriculum. Because there's the people that are in school, sure, but then there's the people that are already out of school, and I think it needs to be everyone, not just kids yes, the kids coming up to school, but not just.
Marie?
I think that one of the things that Brenda, clearly pointed out is the importance of the Treaty Commissioner's Office.
Yeah.
And the Treaty Commissioner's Office is one that is funded by those who are the beneficiaries of that treaty. And in this case, that the federal government has money into that experience, the province has money in that particular thing, as well as First Nations themselves too. Education is a responsibility that belongs and has been in the provinces where the province has education responsibilities. In the federal case, federal has taken their responsibilities for First Nations. So those are the places, if we're going to make this an educational endeavor, then it is from those places that we need to seek funds to create, one, the Education Commissioner, or the Commissioner's Office. But as she noted, it isn't just education. Although education has been a very strong part of it over the years, it has since diversified. So it's finding where the responsibility lies for educating citizens and what that education should be and how they're going to move on it. I think that also the provinces and territories across Canada have, for at least, I don't know, I would say maybe 10 years or so, that they've had taken Aboriginal education as a priority. And it has been numerously stated that that the provinces have an Aboriginal priority, and partly because of the growing number of Aboriginal youth across the country, there's going to be a very large number of people in the future. And so the issue of their success is contingent on their success through schools. And if we can be showing that when we have an education that is without the racism and the prejudice and the discrimination for which many of our youth leave school because of, not merely because they have, less of a meaningful education, but largely it's because of the prejudice and the lack of relationships that they have with people that they end up leaving school. And I think it's something that this province and all those across Canada need to be said, is that we need to deal with racism in Canada at large. And racism in Canada at large cannot be averted unless we address the relationships that they have with Indigenous people and how it can be a much more positive relationship. And in so doing, we will increase the number of youth who will go to school, stay in school, and we will then have Aboriginal success.
Thank you, Marie. Amy, I know you wrote some things down. You haven't said them yet.
Mine was from the basis of educating the teachers and the administration on, and mine was based on the book, because that really just blew my mind. And direction on how to use them for native and non-native, and outdoor education. I want an outdoor classroom. That's all.
Thank you.
Terry Prosper. A lot of the stuff is already said, but when I hear today, it's the very beginning of learning about treaties in the classroom. But the reality is the treaties are about economics, everything, a way of life, actually living, it'd be an everyday part of our life, of our culture, of our spirituality. That's what these treaties will finally become. And I think we have to teach our kids how to implement. We have to build laws and regulations around our treaties. The species that we're dependent on are subject to many things, and there may be days where we can't actually exercise a treaty on certain species because of the availability, and we won't have a right to exercise a treaty around that certain species. So we have to incorporate our science, our political people, people on the land who hunt and fish and exercise these things, gather information, and really define and take jurisdiction over, exercising our treaty ourselves. And the very beginning is teaching our kids, and then work its way through post-secondary teaching, both in schools, in universities, and now to go management plans, whole gamut.
Thank you. But
Okay, John Captain and Virginia, I just, very good discussion, and I like where it's going. Looking at, always trying to envision my father and what he talked about, what his father told him. But the fact that, I just wrote down reconciliation, we got to stop hiding from the past. The thing is, you've got to tell, the education system has to tell our story, the Mi'kmaq story. From the Skelton Proclamation, from the smallpox epidemics, to the wars. You got to look at the history of all of it, of what we have endured. And yet, we can still hold out our hand and say, we're your allies. Let's work together. Looking at a nation, what other nation in the world could do that? When you look at our history, as to what our people have endured from the residential schools and so forth. But the thing is, we cannot hide from it anymore. Canada has to know. Canadians have to know what Canada has done to us. We can't be ashamed of it. We're still here speaking our language, trying to teach our children the best way we can. That was through oral tradition. But the thing is, so many of our people have lost that relationship to the land. But there's two nations. Well, even more when you look at all the immigrants that do come to our lands. Kerry mentioned earlier, maybe, as you mentioned, Brenda, at the airport, for example, people knowing that they were coming to Saskatchewan, that they had a treaty relationship, We'll be educating them again at Pier 21. This is where, we opened our hearts to you. But the thing is, it's a nation standing up again, joining another nation the way we should have done 250 years ago. And that's the thing that we have to do. We can't be afraid. We can't be afraid of looking at what has happened or be afraid of moving forward. Our children are still going to be living here together. Are they going to be able to hunt, fish, or are they going to go to Mars? We have to look at that. That's why I say, we cannot hide. And we should not be ashamed of what has happened to us or what non-Mi'kmaq have done to our ancestors. We have to look at that and look at that as a strength. If we can endure that, we can do anything else. I often mention the residential school system as our Holocaust, as the Mi'kmaq Holocaust. Yet when you mention that, it's like you're offending people. And I'm not there to offend people, but that's our history. This is what happened to our children. What other nation would allow that to happen to their children and still hold out their hand? Let's walk together. You see, that's the true strength. I think I mentioned the Watertown Treaty earlier in one of the treaties that wasn't mentioned. But the thing is, isn't it about time, 400 years after, that the non-Mi'kmaq look at their history of the colonialization and look at the Mi'kmaq and say, look, let's look at the Mi'kmaq. I don't want my children to be afraid of who they are. I don't want other children to be afraid of the Mi'kmaq. But the point is, we have endured so much. Doesn't that open anyone's eyes as to the kind of people, the kind of civilization that we are, or how we were brought up? That's a very interesting story if you look at our history, what we've endured, and we can still reach out. What kind of a Canada can we make? if some of the laws, the Mi'kmaq laws, were incorporated into mainstream society. But that's, you know, a powerful statement when you look at our history and where we want to go.
Thank you. Amy?
One of the great things that we're doing is video cameraing this live, and some of the directors are watching from their offices in Millbrook. One of them said that Tim Bernard, Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq director, stated that his big idea was how do we equip the parents as much information that we want to provide to the students. And he referred to the work that Leah and Mello is doing is bringing that discussion straight from the schools by the children into the kitchen tables where they're confronting myths from the parents and things. And that's the beauty about education, is that yes, we're educating children, but where are the children taking it back? They're taking it back to their households. And so Tim mentioned that, and I'm glad he was tuned in. And so if anyone else tuned in wants to let me know, I will be a part of
Can I
that.
abstract on that? John Paul, Mi'kmaq Namato. It's an interesting question because Julia here was saying we need to, that the question seems to be that it starts at home like it's language loss. It starts at home like the parents should have some, but the thing is, if our parents have been so colonized, their grandparents have been so colonized to believe, language is not going to help you, your culture is not going to help you, why are you trying to hang on something that is of no use to you? Remember, everybody's colonized. We have to change that dialogue. Or people will still be saying, because what you're writing there is you're blaming your parent for something that you shouldn't, really. It's an outcome of what everybody has lived through up until now. So we can change that dialogue now. That's deep.
Walter David, what's the diet? Nova Scotia, Mi'kmaq, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, Mi'kmaq, Boston, Nampastit. Bafsagun Ganamuxin, Young Gano, different student. I'm a Spanote, Galabuad. We should be a different thing, that no rams. That's what I can't do with it. The important thing, would they implement what us? And Sidamino, and Sidamino, Ablasio. Share all these resources. The high concept, minimum earlier, and I shall make more,
Translate that? Walter was just telling us a story of how one time he went to a mountaintop. Is it a lie?
That's what we meant.
Don't trust me, you're going to pick your own translator. But it's interesting. One thing what Walt was saying, and in my opinion, is that as much as everybody gets educated on issues, everybody gets up to speed, we must speak the same. When we do, the message that we deliver must be the same. The context provided to everybody must be such that we're speaking the same language. Is that fair, Walter? Hmm? Yes. No matter where we come from. I like the one about the mountain top. He's on a spirit journey. I like that one.
I like the shaking tent story.
Wounded foot.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left, and then we're going to close. So if anyone else, a lot of people have spoken, but not everyone has. So.
Well, we haven't heard CPU, so.
Trevor Bernard, I'm the director here in number 2, and I guess the thing that that I think is important is that we not look at the treaties as historical artifacts, that they're, you know, that they're living, breathing documents, and that I think it's important that people know, that kids know that you know, there's things that are happening today. I mean, Andale talks about what we dealt with in the past, but there's things that are happening today that a lot of people just aren't aware of. I mean, Canada has literally thousands of lawyers who are dedicated towards their sole purpose is to try to extinguish our rights, to try to minimize the impact of our rights on Canada and the larger society. On any given day, on the court documents across the country, there's hundreds of court cases: Canada versus First Nations, Canada versus or First Nations trappers, First Nations trappers. I mean, what's happened in the past is still happening today. And I remember having a discussion with my wife not long after the Marshall decision, and we talked about it's always nice when we win, but we should always remember the people that put forward those arguments and they weren't successful. Her grandfather was a fisherman, and he was constantly harassed, constantly. And he would try to argue that he was fishing under the treaty of 1752. He was laughed out of court. So that history, that denial is still happening. It's been 16 years since the Marshall decision, and there's nobody fishing under treaty today. Right? So we have to be mindful of that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
all.
Thank you. Stephen?
One of the Higiana Gufti, Elsie Buktukle, Eliana, Mount Nick to Ami Waje. No, I mean, what I'm taking from the two presentations that were made by Marie and Brenda about our treaties and our education process, there's an element in there that we've been colonialized so much that we're emulating the mainstream culture. Our people are imitating white society around us. Like all the nuances and things that are accepted as the way of life. I mean, I think that was a key message to me from both, that we need to get back to our own culture, our own history, our own traditions, and build on those and help build a way for younger generations to follow that route. And I think one of the other points, I think it was John Jerome,
Genius.
Now you made me lose my Mr. Genius. No, the point that I was wanting to outline is the colonialism of our people. I mean, is seen and felt in each of the provinces that we go through. I mean, you get a Minister of Indian Affairs coming into the room, you know, and everybody's kind of like almost like this is the king of our nation, or a regional or district manager, I mean, comes into a room full of Indians. I mean, they're always like treated as if they were royalty, and to a lot of degree, in a lot of degrees, we tend to end up emulating these peoples. I mean, to an extent that we lose ourselves from, our own focus. And I find that a lot of times what's happened a lot to us is that the federal government and the Department of Indian Affairs have been throwing projects at us. Like, we want to focus on treaties, we want to focus on education, but every once in a while they'll throw something out and everybody's running towards that golden egg or something. And we kind of tend to drop everything and we're kind of reactive in some way. of those issues that are purposely, I find sometimes, they're throwing like that at us to disrupt our concentration. But I must say today, we've been concentrating 100% on this project, and I'm glad I was here, that I came down from the mountain.
Thank you.
One last comment, anyone? You're gonna do our last comment?
Could I just say that there, Marie Batista, there, for those who are here and those who are on the camp, we need to have some more stories. We need to have some more balanced stories. We need to have some more stories from other districts and areas. We have some examples we can show you, send you, just to give you a sense of what they look like. I'm not talking about a research paper. It is not a look up all the things in any book. It really comes from your heart. It comes from within what you care to share about your family and any of the teachers that you have. And if you want it to be a Mi'kmaq, it can be a Mi'kmaq. So and it could be then translated or not. So it could be a poem, it could be a story, it could be even a piece of artwork that focuses something on this vision of bringing forth the idea of the treaty issues in your life. How do you humanize the treaty? So I invite people to think about that. Send me an email if you would like to pursue that. Thank you.
So when we decided that we were going to have a treaty education strategy workshop, one of the first things we noted is that one day would not cut it. That's why tomorrow we're going to follow up with what we're talking about here. The discussion doesn't end tonight. We just started this exercise tonight to give you a chance to start thinking about tomorrow. Because, to use my friend Darren Gugu's analogy, I think that we all have a destination in sight. As Mi'kmaq people, we want to be the bus driver, but we need someone to provide the gas. So we need to figure out who's providing the gas to get to that final destination tomorrow. Well, not final destination, but our destination where we want to be. But with that, we're gonna start our closing. We're gonna invite Chief Leroy, who's the chair, up just to say some closing comments. And we're not gonna have a closing prayer, but we're gonna have where did the Grand Council prayer leader go? He was here. Anyway, Chief Leroy, if you would come up and do some closing comments, maybe we'll track down Walter.
Claudio, thank you for all for our presenters. My big idea I wrote down earlier was the two partnerships. Partner with other First Nations, other tribes, or other treaty. There's treaty people across this country. Like Brenda mentioned, I really like her presentation, how she presented the treaty kits, and I think that she has a template that in the treaty commission. It's really something that that's why I asked earlier if there's any outcomes amongst all the schools. I've seen in your numbers there's a large number of schools that there's a treaty kit in every school, but we don't know if they're sitting in the library or if someone's using it or so. I believe so far we have a lot of resources. We have a lot of stuff amongst our schools, and we have a lot of our teachers developed through St. FX. I know when I was in St. FX, we just in 2 years we developed a lot of lesson plans on treaties, and we made songs about treaties, and we did I think we did a lot of great job on educating our own people, our own Mi'kmaq children, and now we're taking it to the next level. And this is the conversation we had with the minister, to understanding about the history. And I told the minister that they need to, the people in Nova Scotia need to know the truth the truth about our history, and we need to have this conversation, a critique conversation, and we need the non-Mi'kmaq to ask tough questions that we need to hear, so we can have a dialogue. We certainly need dialogue, and we need to have that. And because I know that if we just give the teachers the kids for the, obviously we have to train them, you know, they'll be given tough questions, because young people today are very resilient. They're very resilient people, both native and non-native, and even Mi'kmaq people they're very, very resilient, and you know they'll protest. They know about. They're very educated these days. We have higher, like today in Mi'kmaq, we have a higher education rate of. The graduation rates are very high, and there's a large number of Mi'kmaq and other First Nations people that they have degrees, so they know so much. They have lots of knowledge. So they'll be tested. We're all going to be tested. Our leadership is being tested. You know, so it's important that we engage in dialogue and develop this network and this partnership with all levels of government. And like Eleanor said earlier, that we need to really gather our resources together, because this is going to be very expensive, but it's a worthwhile investment, because we're investing in our future generations of our youth. And I recall when I was at the January 11 meeting with the gathering of chiefs, gathering of and all the chiefs met with the crown at the crown gathering they called. And I remember I think it was McCurdy, Grand Chief McCurdy was he's in the speaking note here. He mentioned the treaties. He said the treaties, if they were properly understood, will give us the treaty-based economy that will lift up our people from all the poverty we experience. It's not in the Indian Act that will do it. It's not the Governance Act that will do it. It's not the Land Management Act that will do it. It will be our treaties. So I see it as an investment for our people for our leadership to implement these treaties, and for our young people to not to experience what our people experience, which is poverty. Because today we have huge challenges of drugs, alcohol, unemployment, high incarceration rate, murdered and missing Aboriginal women, all these issues, we have to really rely on our treaty, so we'll have healing, as Jigep mentioned earlier. We need that healing, we need that dialogue. It'll fill the gaps from our allies. Right now there's a huge gap, and I think we're opening up a huge door to fill these gaps in the education system, and we will have a relationship, a respected relationship, and I think that I'm really glad that everyone's here today, and we still have a lot of work to do. Not tomorrow, but a few months, maybe a couple of years. But with the technology and the resources we have, I think we can do this quick. And the knowledge base we have amongst our people, and the support from universities, I think we can really make this happen. And I believe that we're on the right track. And I want to thank you, and I want to apologize that I won't be around tomorrow. I'll be at the funeral. And but for those who are there, I look forward for you guys to have a very productive session. So, and I guess this is the end for today. Thank you.
So we started today with ceremonies, and we'll close with ceremonies. I would like to ask Gipton Walter Denny, prayer leader for Mi'kmaq Grand Council, to come up and just not have a closing prayer, because we have more work to do. And Jeff had reminded me, make sure you take your things home. It's your notes. We're gonna ask you to do some homework tonight, and come back with prepare to do some work tomorrow.
Until Keegan come lamon Chijam Dennis come Jigsaw, so go well by Jigsaw. Gil Arches up here in Chugulusi. Holding my Dandelik Soki, in Tinin Delik said the Muchut Niskam Dandel Kimi Bach, Agliach, Walalio. Thank you.